It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. I am thrilled to introduce you to another woman leader in technology. Jennifer Glaspie Lundstrom is the CEO and co-founder of Tandem. Now, Tandem is going to be a very interesting thing we're going to learn about. It's all about those credit cards with brands on them. You know, when you go into a Kohl's, a TJ Maxx, or so many stores, we have that opportunity to have that branded card. Well, Jennifer has worked in this space for many, many years. She ran the store card program in her 7 years at Capital One as the managing vice president and general manager in the private label and co-branded business, overseeing $6 billion in P&L. She has a strong background in this whole space. So Jennifer, as opposed to me talking about you, let's talk together. Welcome to today's Her Success Story, Jen.
Thank you so much, Ivy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you've worked in this, and make sure I'm explaining it correctly. You've worked in this space of having company brands on credit cards. Share a little bit of your background and how this, started intriguing. You got so engrossed in this that you started your own company.
Yes. Well, so Ivy, as you mentioned in the intro, I spent close to 7 years as an executive at Capital One. And the first 5 years there, I was a general manager in what we called the private label and co-brand credit card space. I'll talk mostly about private label cards because that's the area where we're innovating. And you described it really well. Private label cards are also called store cards, but they're essentially credit cards that work within a given store. And as a customer, you get valuable rewards back at that store. There are a bunch of interesting things about the product structure, and I'll talk about two. So the first is that a card issuer and a retailer create these programs together, and they do a direct connection. Let me explain that a little bit more.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So explain for us laymen what that means.
Yes. Okay. So I'll explain it another way. So most people know that companies that take credit cards don't really like taking credit cards. It's a cost of business for them. And particularly when you go to small businesses, you'll often hear that small businesses don't like accepting credit cards. And that's because the cost for them to accept those payments is so high. So the businesses that we're serving, they spend on average 3% of a sale just to take a credit card. And if you think about where that 3% goes, there's several intermediaries. There can be up to 5 different companies that all take part in processing that payment and get part of that 3%.
So in a small business, 3% is a big deal.
Yes. Yeah.
It adds up.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you think about a retail business, for example, a really well-run retail business might make 10% operating margins at the end of the day. So what we're talking about here, 3%, that's 30% of their operating profit just to be able to take a payment. And as I mentioned, there are all these intermediaries that get a part of that. And as we know, a lot of banks offer very, I'll say, lucrative rewards to customers. So the credit 100%. Card that yes, and right. We all love them, right?
Right. That the consumer, we love our rewards. A clients say to me like, "Oh, do you take credit cards? Because I want, do you take this? I want my points. I want my points. I want my points."
Exactly. And that is such a huge business. So my personal card that I use, I get 2% back that I can use on anything travel related. So let's think about that. I use my card A merchant pays 3% to accept it, of which I get 2% of the 3%. And then I go tell all my friends, isn't my credit card company great? They give me all this money back. Well, who funds that? The merchants where I shop fund that. And Ivy, it's huge. So based on our analysis, merchants fund $50 billion a year of big banks' credit card rewards programs.
So let's just, okay, I'm a numbers person. So 50 billion annually.
Yes, it's massive. So
that's a big number.
That's a big number. Now, private label credit cards work differently, because I initially started talking about this notion of a direct connection. Well, what does that mean? That means all these other intermediaries that I talked about aren't in play. And the way these programs are set up, retailers give rewards back to be used in their store. So rather than paying this 3%, of which they never see any of it again, the cost is much, much lower, and the rewards stay in their ecosystem. Those dollars come back to them.
Right. So it's almost, it becomes an investment for their clients or customers to come back.
Exactly. Yes.
So that's a huge incentive program versus a cost program.
Exactly. It is an investment in loyalty that is essentially self-funded by their cost savings. So because these programs are just so valuable, if you look at the market, you see nearly all large retailers that can have these programs do, right? If you think about Target, Amazon, Best Buy, Nordstrom, Macy's, they all have these programs.
Because I remember back in the day when I was young, right? And getting my first credit cards, you went into a department store at that point.
Yep.
And they were like, would you like to open a card? And all of a sudden, within a year, you had a wallet that had all these cards in it. You realize, what am I doing? And I put them all in my dresser drawer.
Yes, we can talk about that in a minute and how we're solving that issue. But that is a real thing.
Let's go back for a second, because I find this fascinating. You worked for the big banks. You had this background in the big picture of it. And there's a select few who take that knowledge and shift it to starting up your own entity to solve a problem that you see out there in the world that can be massively successful. So what drove you to actually open the doors of Tandem to say, okay, we're going to do this?
Yeah.
And then how do we do it?
Yes. That first step. So, like you mentioned, Ivy, I just saw this opportunity. And to clarify, the opportunity is that while all these big businesses have these programs, small, and I'll use the word small in quotes here, businesses don't. And when I say small, I'm talking $1 billion in revenue and below. So that's why I say I use the word small very loosely. And the reason that businesses under $1 billion in revenue don't have access to these programs is because the incumbent banks, their cost structure and the cost to set up a single new program is so high that they just can't afford to work with businesses by and large that are under $1 billion. So what you have is, as we just talked about, this massively valuable product type that nearly all big businesses have, but that businesses under $1 billion just don't have access to. Okay. And it was such a clear gap and such a clear opportunity. And I'll be honest, I wasn't sure that I wanted to go solve it. I definitely wanted it to be solved. But before I started Tandem, I called several people, really smart people, advisors, people I knew had a unique perspective on this particular business. And the question I asked them was, tell me why I shouldn't do this.
So that is the smartest thing you ever did. Okay. Let's call a spade a spade. I've been a business owner for 30 years, and let's just say round numbers. When I opened Slater Success, my first questions was like, I asked somebody in the space, I said, can you actually make a living? Yeah. Like pay a bill.
Right.
And this was in 2007. So coaching consult, was not what it is today. Right. Yeah. But my first question is, can you pay a bill? Why, what would drive, like, what are the negatives? The positives line up. The positives are so easy to see. It's everything that is not going to work. And, my father said something to me when I was younger, and I was in my mid-20s looking to open my first business. And it couldn't happen, by the way. The first two I tried, never got off the ground. Yes, stubborn is a nature here. But he said, Ivy, imagine a piece of cheese as your business concept, and then keep poking holes at it. Keep taking a knife and stabbing everything that can go wrong. Or as you said, Jen, why should I not do this? Tell me all the negatives. And he goes, at the end of the day, if you have something that's Swiss cheese and is edible and tasty, go for it.
Right.
And I refer to it in my books as my father's Swiss cheese analogy.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Because any new business opportunity will have holes.
If it doesn't, you're not being practical. You're not being realistic.
Exactly. Yes, I love that analogy. I'm gonna borrow that.
With pleasure. Go for it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. But so
you looked at all the negatives.
I did. Yes. And I basically said, please talk me out of this, because I'm about to bet my career at a relatively senior point in my career. And tell me why I shouldn't do it.
And honestly, I want to interrupt because I want to share something with our listeners here for a second. Listeners, what Jen is not sharing is she's a mom with 2 kids. There's responsibility. When she talks about betting her career, she's also talking about betting a major income stream into her family. And we have to look at this on that level as well. And that's can be incredibly scary. We're willing to take risks for ourselves, but we're more risk adverse when we look at our children.
Yes, absolutely. And it's such a great point, Ivy. I'll tell you, before I decided to do this, I talked about the advisors that I reached out to, but I'm married and had more conversations with my husband than with anyone else, because it felt like it had to be a family decision.
100%.
Yeah.
You have to know who your support team is. And if you don't have the people closest to you as part of your support team, you're walking into something with a lot of challenge.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. So how did you go about figuring this out? I have to ask. Because, there's a reason, listeners, there's a reason I was so intrigued about doing a story, doing a series on women leaders in technology is I'm always very open. I'm technology challenged. I didn't grow up with tech. Tech is something that I've learned. So it's not innate to me. And as I referenced, I am stubborn. It's like, I want to know. I want to know. I want to know. I want to continue to learn. I always say I'm going to continue to learn until I'm done in life. So I so admire you and what all the women leaders in technology have done. So how did you go from, okay, I have an idea, to actually making this happen?
Okay. I'm going to tell you about the very first step. And I wish I could share a story I was so bold, and I just jumped off the cliff and never looked back, and I had no doubt. That's not actually how it happened. So, as I mentioned, my husband and I talked quite a bit about this, and we spent several hours on a Sunday afternoon. And where we landed is, I said, I'm going to take 2 weeks, go heads down, write a business plan, and get out and talk to a few investors, which, by the way, I didn't know how I was going to do that. And at the end of 2 weeks, if I think I can raise money for this idea, let's go for it. And he said, great, I've got your back. So I carved out this like couple weeks to really go deep and test the waters with investors to see if I could get funding. That was on a Sunday. The very first call I made was Monday morning. And I had been working with an executive recruiter because I knew I had wanted to go more into the fintech innovator side.
So you were ready to make a move as well.
I was ready to make a move. I didn't know I was going to make a move this big. But I had been out talking to other fintechs and interviewing for mostly COO roles of existing fintechs. And the executive recruiter that I was working with, I was honestly a little embarrassed, Ivy, because I had been so focused on interviewing for these roles that he had introduced me to. And I was worried that I was going to sound flaky because I called him and I said, John, I am going dark for 2 weeks because I might start my own fintech. And he said, well, what's the idea? And I told him, and he said, well, I just raised a fund. Can we give you your first $1 million to get you started?
And I'm so not laughing at you. What my reaction is Jen and I are just getting to know each other, listeners. And, the people here who've been following her success story for a while, one of the first things I say is relationships are everything, and talk to people.
Yeah.
And and you hit the nail on the head right out of the gate on Monday morning.
Yes, exactly. So, it's 9:05 and I'm thinking, this is going to be easy. So it wasn't, I will be very clear, it was not all that easy, but that initial call just gave so much momentum and was surprising. And he was actually able to introduce me to a bunch of other investors, angel investors, institutional investors. And I actually haven't shared this with him, but in my mind, I actually give him credit for being the one that just sort of pushed me out of the plane. He was like, yeah, great, just go. And by the end of the week, I had 10 conversations with different investors and was simultaneously writing the business plan.
And, I love that story because so many people get caught up in the details of getting started.
Yes.
And, I'm a huge believer in take some bloody action and do the procedures as well. Sometimes people's like, I'm starting a business, I'm working on the website. I'm like, start a business, get 3 clients, and it will pay for the website.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And what you did is opposed to work on the business plan and then take it out to have conversations because opportunity presented itself. You ran with the conversations, and those conversations, I'm sure, were very helpful in then devising the business plan.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, it was really uncomfortable because exactly like you said, that would be my nature, to work on the website, to work on the business plan, to make it perfect before I shared it with anyone. But doing it the other way, of just getting out there and starting the conversations, was so valuable. And it reminds me of the saying, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Right.
And it's just so true. And I will tell you, I was really overwhelmed by the enormity of what it would take to go and build this business, build this product, go after this heretofore untapped market. But starting the conversations, having that first investor conversation, having the second investor conversation, starting to recruit my co-founders, the momentum started building.
So let's talk about where Tandem is today.
Yes. So I'll tell you, we first came together as a co-founding team. There, I have myself and two co-founders in October of last year. And as of today, I guess we're 10 months in. We've raised 2 rounds of funding. We've
Wow.
raised 10 million in equity and $50 million in debt. We've hired a team. We have 18 full-time employees now. We've built our product, which was heads down many, many months, writing code, building the product. We've launched with our first merchant partner, and we have a queue of 16 more merchants that are ready to go live that we are onboarding really as we speak. We're onboarding the next one this week.
Wow. Not bad for less than a year.
I'm a little tired. It's been a combination of exhilarating and exhausting.
Well, when you're going, usually the first couple of years, when you're going at that full speed ahead, and, you go from, and I'll just talk practicality, you go from being part of a large corporation, right? Okay, let alone a global bank where you came from,
Right?
but a large corporation that had an HR department, and it had a finance department, and it had, it had that marketing department, and it had the sales department. And then, you're in kind of a chair that just turns at 360 and say, okay, let's turn to the left. We are the HR department right now. Oh, let's take a small turn to the right. Okay, we're going to work on operations today. Oh, we need marketing. Okay, that's the back of the room. I'm going to face that direction and look at that wall right now.
Yes.
And that's how business starts. And if I asked you the question of like, wow, how can you explain how much you've learned in the last 10 months?
Oh my gosh, I can't even. Every day is a learning experience. And you're so right. In the beginning, you have to wear all the hats. Even when we bring on new, we call them tandemites. When we bring on new tandemites,
I love it.
Yeah, we have a role description, but we're really clear. This is your role on paper. There's going to be all kinds of stuff that comes up that we all just kind of pitch in and help with. That's the nature of the startup.
So if we look at, other leaders who are thinking of maybe should I, would I, could I?
Yeah.
What would you share for them?
I am so torn on this. I'm going to share a little, I'm going to get really personal here for a second. As you mentioned, I have 2 children. I gave birth to both of them naturally. Okay. And I wouldn't do it any other way. If I could go back, I wouldn't change my mind. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to anyone else, because I don't want them cursing my name
On the delivery table.
Exactly. And in some ways, I feel the same way about launching your own business. It is, for me, my personal experience has been that I can't imagine having not done it. If I could go back in time, I would never go another direction. I think I have made myself chronically unemployable. I just can't imagine doing anything else. It has been so amazing. But there are also parts that are really hard and painful, and you need to get through those. And so it honestly becomes just such a personal decision about what brings you energy and how you want to spend your time. But I will say that if you are standing there on the precipice and are overwhelmed by the enormity, I can tell you I've been there. And once you start going, it gets easier.
And, very often I will look to my guests to leave something, but I have to tell you, I'm going to leave a comment here, because in your brilliance, whether you knew it or not at the time, and I'll always say, the universe has our back a bit. The having the conversation, starting day one by having conversations as you were building the plan, was the greatest gift you gave to yourself, and is why, to me, a huge catalyst of why you're in this shoes today.
Yeah.
Because the conversations are golden.
Yeah.
And we need to be out there talking to people. There's an amazing amount of knowledge and insight that we can gain, and opportunity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, how can our listeners learn more about you, Tandem, follow you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. That's one of the only social networks that I really spend time on, but you can find me on LinkedIn. Our website is by Tandem, BY, Tandem, TANDYM.com. So we often post things there and keep people up to speed on our newest developments.
I love it. And I'm going to be really excited to continue to follow you and see where you're leading this company, because I think it is, nothing thrills me more to speak to a founder who sees an opportunity in the marketplace and takes action to fill it.
Well, thank you so much, Ivy. Thank you for your support. It's been a pleasure spending time with you today.
Pleasure as well. Listeners, as I will say always at this time, please stay tuned. We are doing a whole series on women leaders in technology. Let us know what is resonating, what you're liking about this, what else you want to hear more of. By tuning in today, take a moment and take a breath and say, what did you take away and what did you learn from this? And then leave that in the comment in what actions you're going to take forward for your career, your life. Thank you for joining us. See you next week.